we want to go ahead and take some time to answer your questions, and we'll open it up for Q&A at this time. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Young man in the back.
I have a lot of questions.
Start with the first one.
And hopefully my questions will help you.
All right.
Since I'm in Idaho forever and ever. First of all, being from California and your mindset, it's a good thing to have. So don't be too sad about being from California. I wish more people from California had your mindset. The first question I have is about what hits home to me primarily is controlling our own land.
Yeah.
I agree. When you throw federal into anything, you don't want it.
That's right.
Me being a sportsman and fisherman and a hiker and camper and so forth, the benefit right now from those public lands is that they're public lands in the sense that we get to use them.
Right.
Okay, and from my concern is, and this may be a detriment to the voting people for you, but maybe you can help me out on this.
Sure.
Is that because the federal government does own a majority of it is national forest, BLM, etc., where there is no business in there checking for oil, mining, fracking, whatever it would be. And that's our biggest concern, because even though we're Idahoans, we like to have our sovereignty as far as hunting and fishing, and we like to have and so forth. So having said that, the biggest concern with that is that if the state gets control of the land, which hopefully they will do a better job, but my thoughts are they do a worse job. And that and only primarily because is that the way it seems like our legislature does things is when they need money to sell land. And they do that quite a bit. They sell public land, use that money to buy business land and try to make a profit, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's
so
a good
Idaho City and so forth and see tracts of land where now there's homes being built, businesses being built, which is good for the economy, I'm sure. It helps taxes and so forth. But the more they do that, the more there's going to be more private land. Like when I was in Virginia, you try to hunt fish and you have to pay $500 to shoot a deer that's about the size of a dog because there's no public land.
Sure.
That public land is very important to Idahoans. And so when the mentioning of taking over that federally controlled land, it just makes us cringe thinking that, well, heck, what is our state going to do with it? All they do is sell the land.
So it's a very good point. So let me make sure I kind of like try to get a consolidated overview of your question, if I get this right. So tell me I got it right. The concern is that if the state of Idaho takes over the land that is currently being controlled by the federal government, then is it possible that they wouldn't do as good of a job, and then that for a sportsman or someone who's a fisherman, that you wouldn't have access to the public land that we currently have?
There would be less public land.
That there would be less public land.
Because the state would want to be selling to help support other things and not raise taxes.
So the concern is simply that we would just have less public land. Is that correct? So my response to that would be threefold. First thing is, I would share with you that it is my contention that the federal government can never do thousands of miles away anything better than we could do locally. I am 100% persuaded that smaller is better and local is better. If we've got an issue right now, for example, at the federal level, anything that happens at the federal level, you face this onslaught of this incredible bureaucracy that you and I simply can't touch. If there's an issue at the state level, you living right here in the Treasure Valley can drive straight over to the Capitol, knock on the doors, and look at the people in the eye who are actually responsible for this. Secondarily, I would say is the likelihood that there's armed resistance to those type of issues at the state level is incredibly reduced. Look at what happened last week in the state of Nevada. Nevada is one of the only states that has actually more land controlled by the federal government, 80+%. And here they're going at, we had armed agents. It was like a night raid, a bunch of guys with M16s and stuff like that, coming after this man because it was BLM land and his cows were grazing. And now you guys know the story of the Bundys over there. So the point is this. I am of the persuasion that we will do a better job at the local level because you and I have the ability to hold people accountable. We cannot, no matter what we do, assume that the government's going to do a good job at anything without you and I as citizens being involved. The danger with freedom is that the original cost of freedom is eternal vigilance by you and I as the citizens. We can never stop holding our representatives accountable. And so that's one and two. The last thing I would say is this, is the state of Idaho has so much land. I mean, that's 63%. There's so much, I would say a fourth thing, but there's so much land there that you and I have the ability, as citizens, forget about me being a senator and forget about Jason for a minute being a representative. We have the ability to be influential. We have the ability, when the land issues come up, to ensure that your voice is heard and say, hey, we want to make sure we got public land for hunting. We want to make sure there's public land for fishing. We want to make sure there's public land for all that type of stuff. I don't think that's going to be an issue. The last thing I will say is this. If you do take a look at all the states, the reality is this. Everywhere where we look around this country, where the states have the greatest percentage of their own land, we have prosperity, and we have freedom, and we have economic booms. So I simply do not trust the federal government in that regard. And I guess the sixth thing I will say is this, is that it's unconstitutional for them to have it in the first place. You know, the Constitution has dictated that they basically get a square mile, or 10 square miles. 2 square miles is all the federal government is even allowed to own in the Constitution. And so there's lots of things we could say, well, I would like if the federal government did this, and I would like if the federal government did that. But you're going to find that Diego is always going to support what's constitutional. Because I could say, you know, I would like it if the federal government took money from all you guys and put it in my bank account. Because that makes me feel good. But it shouldn't make me feel good, and it's just wrong, and it's unconstitutional. So the federal government does not have any constitutional right to all of our land. What we do with it compared to what they do with it, is it possible that we could, forgive the term, screw it up? And we could screw up what we do with that land? Sure, it's possible. But it's your responsibility and my responsibility as citizens to ensure that doesn't happen, not the federal government's responsibility. That's how I would respond. Jason, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I should point out that I have my combo license every single year, and I go out on those public lands hunting myself. And just because ownership of public land would switch from federal to state doesn't mean the land isn't still public. It just means the control is local and the influence is local. And that's a very important distinction. If you think you can go to the BLM and say, hey, you know what, I'd really like to hold a barbecue south of Cuna out in the desert, put up some big speakers, and have a fantastic party for a bunch of people. You can't do that because it's BLM land. The bureaucracy is insane. I know a DJ who's been trying to do that for years. All he has to do is move to state land, one form, it's done. Still desert, one's BLM, one's state. The difference is the hoops that you have to go through and the influence that you can exert on the people that have the control. And that is a fundamental philosophical difference between federal ownership and state ownership.
So back to the question though, convince me that our state legislature will do that. Because that's
how's the federal government doing at it so far?
Well, they're not doing anything, which is good. You know, they don't.
In a sense, but may I posit to you? I have some good friends that live up in Pierce, Idaho, way north in the Panhandle. There are so few jobs up there. Everybody is leaving and fleeing. There's just abandoned homes as people have left to move to the cities to find work. There is no work because of the obstructions that the federal government has put in. Yes, that land is not being touched, but that land also burns up every quarter century or less and is wasted. And there's people up there who have no jobs. My friend is a logger, and he's unemployed because the federal government is purposely putting him out of work. Now, if that control were local, he would at least have a say. He could go to a meeting, he could talk to somebody, he could have a hope of getting a job. But with federal control, he has no hope.
I would add one quick thing to that. One quick thing I would add to that is this, is that I understand what you're saying. I totally understand what you're saying. That convince me the state government will do a better job than the federal government. The answer is I can't convince anybody of that. How do I know? So I definitely am not going to tell you that the state government will do a better job. But here's the thing. Philosophically, my stance is a philosophical position. See, I believe people should have the freedom of speech. But if I give people the freedom of speech, they're going to say bad words. But guess what? They still have the right to say it. They're going to do things that are offensive that I don't agree with, but they still have the right to say it. Because philosophically, that's true. We should give people the freedom of worship. And you know what? Some people might worship the devil because we give them the freedom to do so and we don't compel them to worship God. And I think that's awful. But that's the nature of freedom. And same thing here. is that I can't tell you and I can't convince you the state will do a better job, but it's philosophically wrong for the federal government to be going beyond constitutional boundaries and be picking winners and losers among states and saying these states can have all their property and these can't. So it's our land. We should be controlling it. Philosophically, that's the position we're now, regardless of what takes place. So that's our point on that issue.
I got more questions.
Well, we want to get to it, bro. But we had a question over here.
That first thing is get everyone involved, to get good people in state office.
Exactly.
And then.
Like that, Rodriguez.
No, I agree.
Well, let me share something with you because he brought up a very, very good point, and this is something that just makes me utterly sick. I'll bring this up right here really fast. Like, what he was talking about is our state government right now is buying up private land. It's called a state land board. There's 5 officials. So for those of you, 6. I forgot one. And they're doing so without legislative oversight. So it's our governor, lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, the state controller, the superintendent of public instruction, and the attorney general. So that's 6. That is 6. Now here's what's going on, and this is wrong. But they're getting away with it because people don't know about it. And it's our job to keep them accountable. And you keep them accountable by doing 2 things. 1, being involved, and 2, when they do the things that are wrong, vote them out and vote somebody else in. It's called firing them. They're public servants for a reason. And here's what's going on. They are buying up, because they are in charge of the public endowment fund, right? They're buying up private land and setting up businesses using taxpayer dollars to compete with the private sector. This is fundamentally wrong. And we need to put a stop to it. And the way you put a stop to it is you fire all the guys who are doing that. And I will wholeheartedly say here and anywhere that I'm supporting Russ Fulcher, I'm supporting Jim Schmelik, I'm supporting Chris Troupis, I'm supporting Todd Hatfield for State Controller, I'm supporting Lawrence Denny for Secretary of State. Incidentally, for those of you who are aware, tomorrow Raul Labrador is going to be endorsing Lawrence Denny at the state capitol at noon. If you have a chance to be there, I would highly suggest showing up. But that is wrong, and the way we fix that is we get rid of those guys and we replace them with people who don't do a good job. And if we get in there and we do the same thing, fire us. Fire us again and let everybody know what we did. If I stand here and tell you I'm pro-life and then I vote against a religious liberty amendment, you have a moral obligation to tell everybody in your circle of influence what I did. And to ensure that nobody ever supports me ever again. We as citizens have a duty, and we need to make sure that we fulfill our duty as well. You want to add something to that?
Amen.
You had a question right here, young lady in the middle, in the gray? Yeah, you had your hand up earlier. Okay. Any other questions? We'll come back to you. What was your name, sir?
Chris.
Chris, we'll come back to you in a second. I know you had some more questions, but we wanted to go around the room as well.
After all the signs come down in November and the ads are done and all of that, we're going to send some representatives from our district to the Capitol. And I think about 98% of the things that you guys would vote on, we don't know the details of that. So I appreciate your candid clarity statement. But there will be some things, like the state healthcare change, where input is needed. One of my major frustrations is crafting an email that represents me and my family's views and sending it, and then it says, thanks for your email. Or if you call, you're trying to explain, these things get complicated sometimes because you might have a passion about an issue, but it gets sort of dicey in the middle there. But anyways, I sometimes feel like I'm not understood or heard. So I hear about your communication to us, but what is your, I understand you can't sit on the phone for an hour with everybody, but how can we, what assurances can you give us that you'll listen and consider? Again, we don't have to agree on everything, because obviously you can't do 47 different things, but what assurances can you give us that you'll listen and consider?
I'll let Jason answer that first, and then I'll answer.
Give Diego a chance to grab some water. That's one of the things that motivated me to run, is that I wrote letters to our current senator and received form letter responses. It infuriated me because I know for a fact there aren't that many involved voters writing to a senator in District 15 that he would need to have a form letter. There's just not that many. There's 2,800 super voters in the entire district, and that's the people who bother to show up once a year to a primary. That's one of my commitments, is to respond to every single email. I'm a technologist by trade. I do about 10 to 12 hours a day of typing. Writing emails is second nature. How do you communicate if by chance we have a flood of requests, a flood of input, a flood of comments? That's where a well put together website helps. If your stances and your positions are posted in advance, then that will head off over half of the communication, half of the questions. Now, controversial bills come up. I would hope that we would have a flood of concerned citizens writing in, calling in, and emailing to their legislators saying, this is what I think. The state legislative switchboard has a secretary whose job it is to register that sort of comment. And everybody should be doing that. They keep track. They mark tallies. They say this person called for, this person called against, this person called against, this person against. That information is given to the legislator so that they know. The form letters that you fill out on the websites, those do go directly to the legislator, and there is no reason that that legislator could not craft a personal response to every single one that they get, excepting possibly really big issues that galvanize a lot of response. You will see this sometimes where legislators that are in a particularly bad position, like our current senator, will get flooded with communication from around the state, as they should, because they are out of line and out of step with their voters. In that case, I don't feel sorry for them at all. Maybe that's a good wake-up call. So my plan is to fully televise via a website every possible position so that you know in advance and don't have to ask, what are your thoughts on X? What are your thoughts on Y? And if there is a case where there is no clear answer, then absolutely I will be providing personal responses. It's not that hard to do.
I wholeheartedly agree. That I would add a couple of really quick things. The other thing we'll be doing on the other side is, some of you guys know I own a marketing agency, and so we have the ability to communicate in ways that other people don't necessarily have the ability to communicate. We have our own professional studio, video studio, audio studio, the whole works. So we can do live radio broadcasts, live video, internet broadcasts, and of course town halls like this are very easy for us to set up since we have the equipment to do so. So I would say, let's say there was a very big issue that came up, like Medicaid expansion is going to be coming up, or the repeal of state healthcare exchange, and I'm getting flooded with calls, and I'm getting flooded with responses, and I can't respond in time. I'll do three things. I'll hold a live webcast, so people can interact with me on a live webcast, and we can have thousands of people interact with an opportunity like that. Number two, I will create videos that explain my position that I will post on my website, so that will help to stave off, like he was talking about, a lot of the questions. But the people who want direct interaction, I will host a town hall just like this, and probably in this very location, because we already have everything set up where we can easily host them. I said, hey, if this is a hot issue and I'm getting asked 5,000 times a day, obviously that's an exaggeration, let's have a town hall meeting next Tuesday, 7 o'clock, show up, meet me there, and let's talk to each other one-on-one, and let's bring it out in front of everybody. Because I believe, whether you agree with me or not, there's two things I believe. One, you need to know what I believe if I'm going to be representing you, even if you disagree. And I don't mince my words. I'm not one of these guys who say, well, I voted for it before I voted against it. If Diego's opposed to it, you will know. And this is where I'm going to stand, whether you agree with me or not. That's number one. And number two, I believe that you need to be involved. Those two things. People need to be involved. They need to know what's going on. And they need to know where I stand. And so we'll do what we can to make sure that happens.
Real quick, we call you, come down to the Capitol, visit you in your office for a few minutes.
Of course. That's kind of a no-brainer, brother. You know I'm going to hook you up.
A couple of things to keep in mind with that. Every single legislator does have committee assignments, and committees meet certain days of the week, and so not all legislators are at their desk. And by the way, their desk is just their seat on the floor of the House and the Senate. There is not enough room in the Idaho State Capitol for every single legislator to have their own actual office with a desk and actual private space. And that space is open to the public all the time. They can walk in, filter through anything that's left out, and that's happened in the past. And so you could come at any time, but frankly, committee meetings and all that stuff. But one of the things I would definitely be able to do is virtual office visits. There's no reason. I'm not afraid of the internet. That's what webcams are for, just like Diego mentioned.
Great point. Question?
I'm curious how you guys can vote on the ag gag bill.
The ag gag bill.
Yeah.
Remind me the details of it.
The Ag-Gag bill was a bill that came about because some undercover environmentalists went to a dairy farm in south central Idaho and filmed abuse. Now, there's some controversy as to whether or not they were actually encouraging the abuse and directing the abuse. And we all know, or should know in Idaho, there are, in fact, a high percentage of employees in the agriculture industry that do not have green cards, that do not have documentation, and they're very afraid of losing their jobs. And they will do what they are told. That is wrong. So some may say they were coached, others would say this is what they were doing all the time. In any case, they were filmed on undercover camera abusing animals at a dairy farm. As a result, the agriculture community came together and proposed a piece of legislation that did pass and that the governor did sign, colloquially called the Ag-Gag bill. This bill makes it a misdemeanor with a punishment of up to 1 year in jail and a $5,000 fine to film without permission on the premises of an agriculture establishment. So a farm, a dairy farm, a ranch, a slaughterhouse, anything along those lines. Now, I have two problems with that law, and I would have voted against it. One, it's already illegal to trespass. That law already exists. They already broke that law, and they should, absent real abuse, be prosecuted for that. Secondly, I'm a former police officer, a little known fact, and one of the things that anybody in law enforcement needs to know is what's called the chain of custody and tainted evidence. If evidence is obtained illegally, it is inadmissible in court. But that only applies to law enforcement. A person may go to an establishment, film illegal activities, report them to police, and then invite a prosecution. That's what happened here. One other important thing to know is that the owner of that dairy farm that was whose animals were subject to that abuse was against the Ag-Gag bill. He thanked the investigators and the out-of-state environmentalists for exposing the abuse of his animals. A dairy farm owner does not want beat up and abused animals. They want healthy animals that make a lot of milk, that feed cheese plants, that feed whey plants, that make our they make our economy go. That is the second reason I would have voted against it, is the person who was the subject of this very action was not in favor of it. The reason many were in favor of it is because it provides extra criminal penalties, but illegal activity was happening. Abuse was happening. That's wrong. The evidence uncovered is good. It's good that that evidence was uncovered. It's good, for example, if you were to film daycare workers abusing children, and if you were to be on that premises illegally, under false pretense, under a false name, assumed identity, posing as a worker, it is good to uncover abuse, be it animals or people.
I don't know the details of it specifically as well as he just did, but based on how he just described, I would absolutely oppose it, based on the fact that you don't need to add additional law on top of additional law. And the second thing I see there is that I've got huge problems with, and maybe this is why it's called the Ag-Gag bill, they're trying to gag people, so I have huge problems there that it sounds to me, and I have to look at the details, that this is definitely an abridgment of someone's freedom of speech. So this would be something that it sounds like you would stop somebody from being a whistleblower. Whenever there's abuse going on and you hear this kind of stuff, this reeks to me of cronyism and corruption. It's going on at the highest levels of our government, federal government, here at state level as well, and that's what it sounds like to me. He obviously knows way more about it than I do, but that would be my gut reaction.
And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that it just shows you what kind of little boys club is legislature.
Oh, brother, believe
That goes
me.
back to the land thing.
Believe me, you do not know the half of it. Let me put it this way. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't cuss, I don't run around with wild women, I don't lie, I don't cheat, I don't gamble. I got a clean record. I've never in my life ever once worried about jail time until running for office. And because of the Good Old Boys Network, I've been threatened already.
Oh, yeah.
Here in Idaho, but this is my point. We can stand back and throw up our hands and curse the darkness, or we can say, you know what? We're going to go ahead and step up and do something about it. And that's what we're here doing. And I've been threatened for jail time for doing absolutely nothing wrong but exercising my freedom of speech. And because of that, there's things I can't do and say right now, because if I said it, somebody would consider it, and here's the term, coordination is a term. And coordination is illegal in the state of Idaho, and it's illegal federally. And coordination means this, because I support Russ Fulcher. If somebody, for example, were to buy an advertisement that is opposing Butch Otter, who's also the governor, running for governor, and they ran it through my marketing agency, I will be accused of, and even though it's not true, of coordination. And the accusation alone is, I'm going to be guilty until proven innocent, right? So the other way around. And the headline by your good buddy Dan Pop, you would say something like, District 15 hopeful indicted on, conspiracy or fraud charges. Something like that. That's all people would read, and it's over. My picture would be there, I'd be there indicted on fraud charges, and they find out he did nothing wrong. All he did was run an ad. Running ads, by the way, that's called freedom of speech. And you can do it, and anybody can do it, but as soon as you run for office, I call it the Incumbent Protection Act. They're protecting themselves. They're protecting their incumbency, and they're protecting the Good Old Boys Network. And I'll tell you when you really need to watch out for guys like us. And I mean this seriously. Once we've been there long enough, once we've been there 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, now we know so much better than all the little peons who are down there, sitting down there. And I'm telling you, anybody and everybody who is running for office, and I mean this ourselves included, should be scrutinized. And you should question their motives. And you should get to know them and their family. And you should always question their intent. What's wrong with that? They're representing you. If I were you, I'd question the intent of anybody in authority. Anybody at all times. Question their intent. That's just good and healthy. And I believe that for us as well.
One interesting note along the integrity line, we all receive these questionnaires, dozens of them so far. I was up really late last night filling out 3 or 4 more of them. One of the questions that was very interesting from Idaho Chooses Life was, are you willing to sacrifice your political career to do what is right for pro-life? And that's an easy answer for me. I have no political career. It's easy to absolutely toss that out and say, yes, I will make a stand. I'm a software developer. I hope to make politics better. And I'm quite fine making a stand and tossing away all of the political favors and political cash and political capital that I could have racked up by going along.
Amen. Another question.
Okay.
All right, you had one here really quick? We'll get to yours.
Do you have a plan to hold the media accountable at all? Because that's going to be your biggest enemy going on. They're going to try to...
He'll hit it first, but I'll get this one.
Thank you for asking that question, brother.
There is a growing phenomenon in America. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called the interwebs, or intertubes, or internet. And new media establishments and alternative media establishments are springing up all over the place in order to cover articles of news that the comfy political reporters refuse to touch because it would damage their relationship with a well-placed source or a well-placed, well-funded politician. And that is one of the things that I have been making full use of. If you've heard of Ben Swann, he was the reporter who first questioned President Obama about his kill list. Happened back in Ohio. My political organization, the Liberty Caucus, sponsored Ben Swann to go on a sweeping tour across the entire state of Idaho, 3 different stops. We're bringing in Dick Heller, who is the plaintiff in D.C. versus Heller for the individual right to bear arms. These alternative media establishments need eyeballs in order to sell ads, but in order to encourage coverage that shines the light where the statesman thinks it's too uncomfortable to go.
I still got another part of the question. But it's not so much, I understand they don't cover what they don't want you to know. The other part of the question is they've gone beyond lying to flat out fabrication and assassination. And I think
You're right.
they should be held criminally accountable.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to. So, at least I think I know what you're referring to. So the question here is, what are we going to do to hold the media accountable? And in that case of being criminally accountable, the first thing I tell you is the Good Old Boys Network always going to work like it works. So, as a citizen, you can have a complaint. You could take that, for example, to the Attorney General's office to see if there's actually law that has been broken in terms of slander and this kind of thing. And the Attorney General doesn't do anything about it. You're done. Okay? So, you need a good Attorney General. Chris Trupis is a perfect example of that. What I would say, on the contrary, is that the way you counteract that, the way you counteract a negative media, is by beating them at their own game. And so this is something unique to our campaign. I mentioned it earlier. Anybody here is welcome to go on a tour. But as a business, I am a marketing consultant and a business consultant. I train businesses, etc. But as a side of our business, we have a complete marketing agency, meaning we have a video studio, a production studio, a recording studio, a photography studio. We have on staff, we have a videographer, we have a photographer, we have graphic designers, print. You may have noticed that for a very small campaign in the Senate district, we have some pretty professional looking material. Okay, when it comes to print, signage, media, video, social media, internet, streaming media, 100% of anything that's media related, we can do it, quite frankly, I would say better than anybody else can do it in the state. So, this is something that got me in trouble, and the reason I've already been threatened is because I told people, as seeing these things, seeing the Good Old Boys Network at use, I came out one day so frustrated and I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to use, and I just got all fired up in this room and said, I'm going to use my marketing agency, and every last piece of corruption I see in the state house, I'm going to expose all of it. I don't care who it is, if you're my best friend, if you're my mom, my uncle, my neighbor, I'm exposing all you dudes. We're going to create videos, we're going to have direct mail campaigns, we're going to put websites up in your district exposing each and every single one of you. We're going to let everybody know what's going on. And everybody, yeah. But then all of a sudden it comes up, you better not do that. Then the side of, hey, you better not do that. If you do that, thus and so is going to happen. You're in danger. Your family's in danger. Don't do this. You know, it just gets ridiculous and disgusting. But guess what? If we don't do that, who's going to do it? If we don't stand up now and start doing that, what's going to happen? This goes on and on and on, and the people are being treated like cows. Let's milk you for all you're worth. Let's keep you stupid and docile and make you think that you can't do anything, and you just sit there and we're going to milk you and do whatever we want to do with you. And this is the culture that we have today in America and in Idaho. People are being groomed this way, and people are giving up. Well, before we give up, give us a shot. That's what we would say.
I want to add, you may not be as powerless as you think you are when it comes to exposing corruption in the media. By way of example, December 17th of 2012, a group that had only been in existence for around 6 months, called the Republican Liberty Caucus of Idaho, called a press conference and announced it via Tea Party Bob on 580 KIDO with Kevin Miller in the morning. And we said, we are going to hold a press conference on the Capitol steps on Thursday. This was Tuesday. And we are going to encourage Governor Otter to stick to the people of Idaho's request that we not implement a state exchange in Idaho. The Republican Party passed a resolution saying, please do not force Obamacare on us. Do not waste $70 million. We made this public around 7 a.m. Governor Otter bumped up a bunch of his appointments and suddenly released a press conference and a press release saying, okay, I'm going to implement a state exchange. He was going to do that on Friday. So 3 days early, just because a bunch of people were fed up, we went down to the State House, we signed our name, reserving the Capitol steps, we called people together, 2 news crews showed up, and all of a sudden the governor moved his plans, tipped his hand. You have power. You have power. Do not relinquish it. Exercise it. And another thing, this right here, it's called a bully pulpit. That is what representatives have that most people don't. And that's why you elect good representatives, because they can hold the sway of the traditional media. Even if the traditional media wants to ignore with every fiber in their being what we are saying, a state senator and a state representative calling press conferences, calling out corruption, have weight. If you do not believe it, ask Mark Patterson.
Exactly. We're going to take a few more questions because it's a small group. We want to make sure we get to the questions we have here. However, we've gone a little bit longer than we originally anticipated, but that's good. We want to get you guys interaction. So we're going to take a few more questions. We'll take them right here, and then, of course, in about 5 minutes, we'll wrap things up, and we'll be here around just breaking things down. But again, we want to thank everybody for coming, so I just want to let you know we'll take about 5 minutes more questions. Question right here really fast.
Education.
Yep.
You mentioned about all the regulations and everything teachers have.
Yep.
You can't teach, I agree. Being Professor Clarkson. Another question I have though is, it seems like the schools are always pushing a bomb and a bomb and a bomb.
Oh, right.
The property tax just keeps going up. And And so when we ask them these questions, do they always say we need more money? Do you think more money is going to help our schools?
No.
Or does it just go to more football programs, uniforms, et cetera, et cetera? I'm just concerned that every time the bond comes up, usually on a time when no one can vote.
So the question he asked, and the reason I'm repeating the question, of course, is for people who can't hear it, this is also being recorded. The question is about schools, and his concern is that schools are always asking for more money, and they're always passing a bond, they're always trying to pass a bond to get more money, and do we think that money is going to help? Is that the correct question? The answer is, I absolutely do not think more money will help, and I'll also share this with you. First of all, at the state level, we have nothing to do with bonds. Bonds are going to be passed at your city level. So again, the more local, the better. If you're in Meridian, if you're in CUNA, you're in Boise, wherever they're trying to pass that bond, make a stink and raise a stink with your city council and with the other officials who are responsible for that. But what I would say is this. Take a look at any one of those bonds and take a look at private schools, take a look at charter schools, take a look at home schools. Let me ask you a question. Does it really take $44 million to build a high school? Does it really take $50 million to build these schools? I'm here to tell you the answer is no. There's so much waste and inefficiency there because people aren't being held accountable, and they always make you feel guilty. Oh, we're not giving enough money to our schools. We're not giving enough money to our schools. Look at the private schools. How is it that the private schools are educating their children better than the public schools with so much less money? Right? And if I were to have a panel of district superintendents here, I've already asked them that question. So I could already tell you what they would tell me. The problem is the things they're going to say is, yeah, but the private schools get to do whatever they want. They don't have Common Core. They don't have these regulations. They don't have teacher tenure. They don't have all this ridiculous curriculum that we have to shove down people's faces. They don't have to spend all their money. They can carry money. They'll tell me this whole list of stuff. My suggestion would be that, okay, all those things you say you need so you can educate as good as them, what if we gave those to you? Then what? Then what could you do? Then we could educate your kids. Okay, well then now I'm going to hold you accountable to that. But that would be my response. So let Jason respond.
One other quick, slight technicality on the funding of schools is that there are three ways that schools receive funds. Block grants from the Department of Education, property taxes, and then funds directly from the state budget. And there's actually a difference in law for what the bonds can go to pay for versus what the money from the state, 47% of the state budget goes to primary K-12 education. And that money is allocated for specific things that are separate from the money that bonds go to pay for. So the two pools of money cannot actually intertwine.
That's true.
Bonds go, I probably got them backwards, so let's just say either way, flip it. Bonds will go towards physical property, buildings, maintaining buildings. And monies from the state government will go for salaries, will go for instructions, will go for soft goods like books, materials, and training. If it's backwards, then forgive me on that. And so that's part of the reason, and that's state statute, by the way. It's part of the reason why there's... Yes. That's part of the reason...
Use the money how they see fit. That's what I say.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why they're always coming for bonds. The other is that they're short-sighted and they always want to debt finance everything. I'm a Dave Ramsey kind of guy, so you probably know where I stand on that.
So let me add a little piece of information to that, and I hope this disgusts you, and I hope you guys recognize this type of thing. Something I learned about that I didn't realize, and 50% of the Idaho state budget in most states, it's about 50% of most budgets is for education. 50% of the federal government's budget is education, which the federal government, again, constitutionally, should have nothing to do with education at all. It's unconstitutional. The Department of Education, when you tell them to take a hike. But the reason why we don't take a hike is because we like their money. Okay, so we're taking all their money, and that's the problem. But here's the thing. These schools are incentivized to do the wrong thing all the time. The superintendents, and I met with these guys, and it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Most of them, I will tell you, most of these superintendents are well-intentioned. The principals, administrators, and teachers are well-intentioned. But they are also strapped, and they have duties and obligations to pay teachers, to pay pensions. They have to work on these budgets that are enormous budgets, and therefore they have to have money for it. So they're always asking for this money, and they'll do anything they can to get money because they are strapped. They have no other choice. And the incentives that are provided them to bring in revenue to their schools and school districts will shock you. Let me tell you one of the number one sources of revenue, at least in the state of California. I haven't been in Idaho long enough, and now that I've been here, I haven't worked with superintendents, but the 400 plus superintendents I worked with in Washington State, Montana, and California, will tell me that one of their number one sources of revenue is something that comes from Title IV. It's called IDEA, and I used to know the acronym right off the top of my head. But it's the, it has to do with disabilities. It's part of a federal statute, Title IV. And here's what it says. If your student is disabled or has a disability, the school can apply to get this additional federal money, and it's a lot of money. It's anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 per student per year. In a state like Idaho, where you're at $5,000 to $6,000 that you're getting, it can be almost double for what the student gets. Here's how to get that money. If your student is disabled, that doesn't mean that they are Down syndrome or anything like that. Here's what that usually means 80 to 90% of the time in most school districts. If your child talks in class, they're obviously ADD or ADHD. And if you want to know why we have this incredible rise of students being diagnosed as ADD or ADHD, it's because I would be, by the way, the first one to be called ADD or ADHD. You go back 20 years ago and I would be a vegetable today on Ritalin or Adderall or whatever drugs they want to give me. And we all know who are the number one contributors to all federal election or to federal officials. It's the drug companies. Okay, I'm not an anti-drug company guy. Let them do what they want to do, but we don't want cronyism going along where they're feeding money to all these congressmen and all these officials, and those officials are ensuring that we have law that incentivizes people to ensure that kids are put on drugs. That's what's going on today, and that's the kind of junk that we need to expose and that we need to let people know on mass level, mass scale, and that's the kind of stuff that we'll be doing. So, with that being said, we got time for one last question.
With regard to education, I think that one of the things that is, I've been studying education pretty heavily the last year or so, more than normal. And one of the things that we all know is that with the increase in education spending, it's gone up enormously. And most of the growth in education spending is not at the classroom level.
No.
Most of the growth
It's all bureaucracies.
the administrative level. So I guess I'd like to hear you say that you would have some ideas on how maybe we can rein in that growing bureaucracy.
Okay, so my idea is what I shared before, and the problem with my idea this way is that I just believe in letting the people who are the professionals do their job at anything. All right, so for example, maybe you're a software developer. Let's just imagine for a second. I know nothing about software. How many of y'all people here know about developing software? How many of y'all, what language do you code in, by the way? C++ or something like that? JavaScript? He codes in PHP and Java. How many understand PHP and Java? Okay, so let's take me, you two ladies, and the three of you at that table, and how about the six of us create laws and standards and rules and explanations that put regulations and standards on Jason about how he codes in PHP and Java. And the six of us get together and do that. How many think that'll be effective? Well, you guys don't even know what PHP or Java is. I happen to know what PHP and Java is, but I'm not a software developer, so then I would stand on our committee as the one guy who knows, right? And then we would be putting all these regulations on him, and he couldn't do his job because he's thinking, what are you guys talking about? Every regulation you put on me is not even what I do. That's what happens in the state legislature when the state legislature says, we need to tell the teachers how to teach. We're going to give you guys regulations to teach how to instruct, and none of them are even teachers. They're not administrators. And maybe there's one guy who was a teacher 25 years ago, as if it's the same society we live in or something like that, right? So the point is, we want to keep saying, well, we're going to rein in the bureaucracy, and we're going to rein in this. How many times have they said they're going to rein in the bureaucracy? How many times have they said they're going to rein in the spending? How many times they're going to put the money in the classroom? It's the same platitudes they use every single campaign. What I want to do, what I want to say is, let's bring them in, the superintendents, the principals, administrators, and hold them accountable to what they say they need. And you guys tell us. For example, what he was just explaining, one of the things that the administrators all told me is, if I just had control of my money, because he said, I can't hire one new teacher and I cannot buy one pencil, but I could put a laptop into every single one of my kids' hands and have extra laptops. But I don't need laptops, Diego. I need pencils and papers and a couple of good teachers. And these couple of teachers over here, most teachers are good. Just like I want to believe most cops are good. But there's a few that aren't. There's a few teachers that aren't. And I can't get rid of those, Diego. I can't do anything about it. Until there's some scandal, I can't do anything about it. Right? So let's let them tell us what they need, and then let's give it to them. I know it's a novel idea, but that's what I say. Here's a professional. If I hired a plumber to come fix my toilet, but then me, not being a plumber, told him what tools he could use, what tools he couldn't use, what pipes, I don't know anything about plumbing. How would I ever think that the job would get done right? And then my plumber would say, well, it's just going to cost more money, more money, more money, and the job never gets fixed. Why don't I say, you're a plumber, you're the professional, I hired you because you're the professional, you just do what it takes to get the job done, and I'll pay you the market rate. That's my plan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We thank you for coming. We want to let you know about the two things really fast. Number one, this Saturday at 2:30 p.m. at the Idaho State Capitol, there's going to be the Idaho Patriots Day. We're going to be there. There's going to be lots of people there talking about freedom and prosperity in America. We invite you all to come to that. And last but not least, on May the, oh wow, I already forgot. We're going to have another town hall right here, me and Jason. May 6th. That's the webcast. May the 13th, right here at the same location. Hopefully by then we're planning on being a lot more people here. But bring all of your friends, bring your families. You guys have heard us here now. Even if you disagree or oppose us, we want you here so you can hear what we believe and what we want to do with the Idaho State Capitol. So thank you again for being here. God bless you. And God bless the State of Idaho.
Diego Rodriguez for Idaho State Senate.